The police who arrested him are talking about the sudden death of Robert Fisher in prison. We broke that news last night. Fisher is the 34-year-old man police called a monster. He and then tried to cover up what he did to little Josefina Cunningham.
She was just 3 years old. New at 6 now, one of the officers who worked closely on this case tells us about his conversation with Josefina's father shortly after finding out Robert Fisher is dead. Let's go to Tessa Bentulin live here right now in the studio with us. Tessa, good evening.
Hi, good evening, Sabrina and Mark. I had the chance to interview Detective Sergeant Michael Diso with Rensselaer Police. He says Josefina's father wants to move on. Diso says Fisher's death makes the father relive that terrible attack on his young daughter. Josefina died in July 2023 in Rensselaer at the hands of Fisher. This is Josefina on your screen. Fisher is accused of raping her while she was alive and awake. Fisher just began a 20 years to life in prison sentence. He was serving his time at Elmira Correctional Facility. Detective Sergeant Diso was one of the first handful of officers that responded the day Josefina died. He's had many conversations with Josefina's father. And what was that exchange like?
It was tough because there's nothing going to bring his daughter back, and although he's no longer paying for this person to be in prison to pay for his meals and his lodging, it's not going to bring his daughter back. He's still without his daughter, and it's still bringing it up over and over again.
I also got to catch up with Josefina's older brother, Jaquan Stewart. He says his sweet and smart little sister who loved Baby Shark deserved to grow up and live a full life. Stewart tells us what he and his mother thought about Fisher's death.
My mom was very shocked that she's relieved. She's dead. She's happy that she's dead. A lot of people are happy that he's dead. I was very shocked because I really wanted the death penalty, and I was hoping he can serve his life sentence 20 years.
Rensselaer police say they do not know yet how Fisher died. Fisher's death is being investigated by state coroners and medical examiners. Mark and Sabrina.
Let me first start off by saying I offer my condolences to the family and loved ones of this little girl whose name was Josefina Cunningham. I couldn't even put her picture up on the screen, but she was a pretty little 3-year-old black girl, had her whole life ahead of her, and it was cut short because of this parasite that you see on the screen that decided to go and do what he did. As far as I'm concerned, justice behind that wall was served, and rather quickly. Number two, this is the type of story that would probably end up on my Patreon, but I felt compelled to bring this story onto YouTube because of how swiftly it happened with this dude. It didn't drag out. And by swiftly, I'm talking about what needed to happen. This is what I'm talking about when I say irredeemable acts of violence. This right here cannot be redeemed what this guy did. This guy violated and took out an innocent 3-year-old girl. I can't even imagine what her final moments had to have been because of this monster, this monstrosity that you see on your screen right now that I can't even bear myself to look at while I have to look at my other screen while gathering my thoughts to not even look at the filth that's on the other screen. So this dude violated and took out this 3-year-old little girl last year, and they went through the trial, found him guilty probably mostly of every charge that was thrown his way, which is right, and he got sentenced to 20 years to life, which means he probably was eligible for parole after 20 years, which is horrendous in and of itself. I feel like someone who does something like that should not even get or be eligible for parole, but they said 20 years to life. Now, after doing a little bit additional research and some detailed digging on the case itself, I think I do now vaguely remember this based on the details alone and some other mugshot images that I found of Robert Fisher. I might have talked about it on Patreon, I can't remember, but these details came up and stood out. The fact that finding out that Robert Fisher was actually in a relationship with this girl's mother, and I think that's what I remember, was finding out that he was in a relationship with the girl's mother, and they said he only recently started staying at the home. Something else that I found out is that on the night that he took out Josefina, is that he was left there to babysit her while the mother was asleep after she had took some medication. I don't know, maybe she wasn't feeling well, or she was, whatever the case may be, but apparently the mother had took some medication and it was enough to make her go to sleep, and that's what ended up happening. And then also he admitted that he drugged Josefina with the same medication that her mother, the prescriptions that her mother was taking, in order for her to most likely get drowsy. So it probably had like a drowsiness effect to it as well. And then also it says that they figured that the crime was opportunistic because they didn't find a motive as to why he did it. He just did it, and he took advantage of it and said, this is one of my opportunities to be alone with the child because the mother is knocked out sleep, so let me go ahead and take advantage of it. And what he did, and then after he did what he did, he ended up trying to cover up what he did to this little girl by cleaning up her body and any kind of residue or mess that he left behind with Clorox wipes. So I tell you, the details are just as horrendous as the actual act itself. Don't get me wrong, the act itself is already bad, but look at the steps leading to that. So in my opinion, I wouldn't be surprised if this guy was plotting since day one to do what he did to this little girl. This guy, they said, just began his prison sentence, which means he probably wasn't even in there for 20 days. They didn't specify when he went in. I'm not exactly sure when he got into prison, but they said he just began his sentence, which sounds like to me he just got in there probably within the last week or a couple of weeks. I wish they would have said when he went in. If someone can find out for me when he actually got put in prison, I would greatly appreciate that. And as soon as he got there, he was out of there. So somebody behind that wall got wind of what he did and said, you know what, we can't have him here. You know what this reminds me of when I first heard about it? And it's crazy because this guy wears glasses too, about the person I'm about to mention, Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, what he did was not on the level of what Jeffrey Dahmer did. It was still extreme nonetheless. And like Jeffrey Dahmer, this guy, Robert Fisher, got exactly what he deserved. Now, they said they don't know the details as of yet as to how he lost his life behind bars, but I could think of a couple of ways in which it did. One, maybe they could have contaminated with his food if they wanted to make it look like, very quiet, not as messy. That would be one way. The other way, of course, is somebody took him out, and of course that's the more messier, extreme, in your face type of way, to the point where we may not find out who did it on either scenario that I gave. And you know what? If we don't, so be it. Because one thing we do know for sure is that he's gone. He is no longer amongst the living, even if he's locked away and tucked away from the outside world, and he just couldn't freely go about his day like a regular, normal human being and citizen of the establishment. And they interviewed the brother of the little girl towards the end. He gave his 2 cents. He said he didn't think he was going to get, the little 20 years after, to life. He said he had wanted the death penalty, and I'm sure many of the other people wanted it too. Well, to the brother, it looks like you got it. It didn't happen via, the state, but somebody within must have been answering y'all prayers, because I can only just imagine what was being said from the family as it pertains to this dude and him wanting to, lose his life. So whether we find the details are out or not about who did it, well, we probably won't find out who did it, but how it happened, it is what it is. The guy's out of here, and that's really all that matters. So again, offer my condolences again to the family and to the loved ones of this little girl. May she rest well, considering all she had to suffer and endure in these last minutes and seconds and moments of her life. And as for Robert Fisher, may he too rest, but I want him to not rest well. I want him to rest in hell. Hell, I would even remix the RIP from rest in peace to rest in pieces. I've always said this type of act is irredeemable. I already told you what my punishment would be if it was left up to me for someone who would do something like this. And well, it looks like somebody handled their job for us all. Now remember how I put in the post to stay tuned to the very end, because it's something that came across my way literally, because this right here actually kind of blew my mind a little bit. Now this of course is not Robert Fisher. This is someone completely different, but it's the reason why I'm bringing this up. So this dude's name is William Brand, and this guy was locked up behind bars for doing a 10-year sentence for basically committing the same act that Robert Fisher did. Not to the extreme levels where he actually took someone's life, but he did assault in that way. Y'all know what I mean when I say in that way, a minor, and he was doing a 10-year bid. Well, this guy ended up meeting the same fate that Robert Fisher did. Now here's the plot twist, because not only did William Brand get the same fate as Robert Fisher, but it turns out that William Brand was in the same prison as Robert Fisher, and they both met their fate on the same day, literally an hour apart. Because if I'm not mistaken, with Robert Fisher, he was found at either 1:50 a.m. or 2:50 a.m. and this guy, he was discovered about an hour apart. So it was either 1:50 for him or 2:50 for him, or it was either 2:50 for Robert Fisher or 1:50 for him. Either way, it was an hour apart, and those were the two times. So my guess is this was an orchestrated thing. Somebody in there took both of them, and I would not be surprised if it was the same someone who took him out was the same person that took out Robert Fisher. Because what are the odds that they're in the same prison, they're found deceased an hour apart, and they're both in jail, they're both in prison for the same type of crime? So while the story of what they both did had a messy middle, the ending was definitely a good one. Kudos, in my opinion, to whoever or whoever's did it.